When you buy a house here in BC, often you just find a home that fits your needs, sign some papers that you don't totally understand, and just like that, you bought a property with no real understanding of exactly what you've done. Congratulations. And this, of course, is the perfect plan, because if something doesn't go just exactly right, you can just blame your realtor because, let's face it, we are all idiots anyway. And the problem could not have ever been that, well, most members of the public don't really care what they're signing as long as it gets them the property that they want. And, well, that don't fly here on this channel, because Mr. Real Estate Education is my name and explaining boring forms is my game. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you the updated version of the BCREA's contract of purchase and sale for residential properties. And I'm going to show you how I personally write a contract because, wow, not a lot of you seem to know what it is that you're signing. But also, as a listing agent, when I receive offers from other buyers agents, often they are written extremely poorly, and many times things are just completely left out or forgotten. But more on that in a bit, because I can't possibly explain this document that is responsible for you buying the single largest personal investment of your lifetime without first asking you to subscribe to the channel if you would like to stay more informed about the Surrey and Fraser Valley marketplace. And if you like free education and appreciate it from these realtors' biggest scammers, liars, fraudulent, then please go ahead and click the like button for the YouTube algorithm, so more members of the public just like you can educate themselves before choosing which realtor they would like to work with. And if you don't have a realtor and you think my team might be a good fit to work with you, well, you can book a call with me right now using the link in the description below at a time that works best for you. Now, let's dive into the contract of purchase and sale provided by the good people at the BCREA and updated for 2023 with the inclusion of the buyer rescission period. So let's jump into the form, and I'm going to show you our backend system here. This is called Web Forms. If you want a little bit of background about Web Forms, it was actually developed by the good people here at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, and now all across Canada, all of the agents, well, as far as I know of anyway, mostly they use this system to write their contracts. Now, this is the latest version of the contract of purchase and sale. If you're buying a strata property, or if you're buying a detached property, they are the same contract. However, many of the terms will change. So I've actually gone in and taken my template that I use for the strata side of things because I want to show you those extra clauses. I'm also going to show you exactly how it is I write an offer so you can better understand. I'm not going to read you all the legalese of the standard form. Probably not a hard form to find online, but the first 2 pages of the contract are actually not the contract at all. What they are is explanations of the contract that you're about to sign. And you might actually read them because you're here learning about this form on this channel, but most people just glaze over the first 2 pages. What I want you to do is stop here on page 2, term 6, and it just basically outlines the seller's responsibilities financially and the buyer's responsibility financially. If you're a good real estate agent, you will have your client, either the seller or the buyer on your side, initial off on these financial costs. So hey, you can't say, you didn't tell me, for instance, that I need to pay for a lawyer or a notary on the seller side. Basically, when you are selling a home, lawyer, notary, and then their real estate fees are your biggest expenses. On the buyer side, there could be much larger expenses like the land transfer tax or even GST. But those first 2 pages are strictly explanations of the contract, just outlining exactly what is happening when you get to page 1 of the contract of purchase and sale. Now, right at the top should be the brokerage and the realtor that is preparing the offer. One of the first field that usually gets left out is the actual date. So the date of the contract being written, not accepted, not even presented, but the day it's being written should be outlined here. Now, if you actually have a property that is on the MLS, you can type in the MLS number and it should auto-populate a bunch of this information for you. I'm obviously going to leave it blank here for examples. But the buyer's name should now be written in. There's actually 3 buyers' lines. It's funny, we're starting to see 3 and 4 and 5 people as the buyers on many contracts, but the buyer's name just goes off to the left here. One thing that is very rarely ever on the contract is the buyer's address. Personally, I think it should be mandatory. I think if you're trying to buy my home, I should know exactly who you are. You shouldn't be able to go anonymous, but they often do not write down their address. The seller, on the other hand, most often probably lives in the property, so their names are already on the MLS for the most part. They should be there, and the address is often the address that you're purchasing. However, if it's an investment property, their address may differ. This is new on the form for the year. This may not be the seller's address for the purpose of giving notice of the rescission period. We're going to talk a lot about the rescission period. So it's saying, hey, don't rely on this information to serve the notice if indeed you want to walk away from the contract. Then we get into the property details. This should all, again, be auto-populated, but any agent should double-check this. Postal codes is one of the worst. It's almost always incorrect in so many of the old listings, so you want to double-check that. I find Google is actually way more accurate than sometimes even the Postal Service. And then you have, of course, the legal address, which I just mentioned. There's something called a PID, or a parcel identifier number. That needs to be in here. And then you need the legal description. So when you're talking about a property here in British Columbia, you need 3 different kind of check marks to make sure we're talking about all of the same property, meaning the actual mailing address. The legal address is the legal description, so it's different. You probably don't even know your legal description. I sure don't know mine for my home. And then you cross-reference that also with the 9-digit number that is the parcel identifier number. And that is the way that lawyers and everybody else involved can double-check or triple-check, I guess, to make sure the property is actually the property that is being bought and sold. So once all that is correct, the first thing is always the purchase price. I put in $1 million here just for fun because it's going to matter now that we have the buyer rescission period. So the price is always written 2 ways. One, numerically, and then second, it's actually written out in words. That is so there is no dispute of, hey, is that a 0 or a 6? And it really just clarifies the actual purchase price. And trust me, I have had people dispute that after the fact if they feel bad a few days after removing their conditions. Oh no, I actually meant it was $1,000 and not $1,600, that sort of thing. So this is why it's written in 2 ways. Now, the buyer rescission period comes along now with a fee, and that is 0.25% of the offer price. So if you walk away using the buyer rescission period, well, this on $1 million would have a $2,500 fee. That now does get written out. My understanding when this form came out was that was, again, supposed to be written 2 ways, but I think the BCREA and even the BCFSA has gone away from making you write it 2 ways because this gets crossed out so many times, it would just be an absolute jumble. Next below that is deposit and how deposit will be paid. Deposit in BC, most often you're going to be looking for about 5% of the overall purchase price. It doesn't have to be that. It can be as little as $1 and it can be as much as the full purchase price should you choose. But a really good rule of thumb is 5%. So in this case, I put down $50,000. And then just below, you're going to see the terms of which that will be paid. If you don't fill out this blue box here, then deposit is payable within 24 hours of acceptance. But most agents only want the deposit to be paid in the event that the deal actually goes firm. So we often type in within 24 hours of subject removal or within 24 hours of a firm deal. And in my personal case, I personally like to receive most of my deposits by bank draft. So I specify that here so it's not written with a personal or certified check, which would be an absolute mess. Now, you will notice at the bottom of each page that's actually a contract page, the seller, this is nice that they've separated them. They used to have them bunched together, the buyer and seller initials. The seller's initials go on the right-hand side at the bottom, and the buyer's initials go on the left-hand side. Now, if there is a counter offer, say, for instance, we want a $60,000 deposit, and we're countering that back to the buyer, we're going to cross that right out, and every single change on a contract has to be initialed, or it's not firm and binding. So what realtors will do is often when they've negotiated all night long and there's scratches and craziness written all over the contract, we go through and we just verify that every single change has been initialed, because if you miss even one initial on 17 pages with 5 different people signing off, it is not a valid contract. Now let's move on to page 2. Now this used to be snugged up very, very nicely under deposit, but it's just a continuation now. Next, you have to say where the deposit is going to go. Here in BC, it is most customary, and it doesn't have to happen this way, but the actual regular form that we use here, the contract of purchase and sale, usually puts it into the hands of one of the brokerages, and most often it is the buyer's brokerage. So in this case, I work for the amazing company of Macdonald Realty Delta. So you would pay your deposit if you were one of my buyers with a bank draft, and it would be payable to Macdonald Realty Delta in trust. So the seller doesn't have that money, the buyer does not have that money, the real estate companies themselves under the act hold on to that money in case of anything going sideways. And then when the deal just normally progresses, that money gets forwarded off to the different lawyers closer to the time of completion. Now, number 3 is terms and conditions. And again, you can kind of see this blue field here. This is where the real estate agents start hopefully making their money and knowing exactly what it is they're doing. Now, what you're supposed to do as a real estate agent is you're supposed to type a brand new contract from scratch every single time. But I personally think that that is the wrong way to do it. Here's the way I prefer to do it. I take a template of my offer and I put in every single condition that I think is going to happen on probably 90% of my properties. And I'm going to just have them pre-done in a template because it's a lot easier to delete something if you don't need it than remember to add it. And earlier on, I kind of alluded to a lot of real estate agents forget to put things in the contract. This is my way of never, ever forgetting to put something into a contract. So for instance, if my buyer does not require financing or my buyer does require financing, I have this top clause here. The buyer hereby waives their condition to financing. Well, in this case, let's pretend my guys are going to get a mortgage. My buyer is going to get a mortgage and I take that out. Then I fill out the financing clause. Now, this is the correct financing clause that people should be using. Often it just says subject to satisfactory financing. If you talk to a lawyer, that's not actually legally enforceable, but it does happen quite often. Now, I don't know if you can see my little bar down the side here. This is just a tip for real estate agents out there. If this little bar is here on the side, when I actually press print and put this onto paper or into a PDF, all of this is going to get shrunk down really tiny. So my job, while I'm writing this offer, if I'm a good agent and I want to be able to read this contract when I print it, is to eliminate enough of this writing down the side so it doesn't get shrunken down into tiny little words. So let's keep going. And well, we're obviously going to have the financing condition in. This condition is for the sole benefit of the buyer. We are going to have the inspection condition in. So let's remove the wording that I have. Again, I have double terms in here. I'm going to remove the part that says they are going to waive their financing condition and so on with the next conditions. Now, let's say, for instance, I received the disclosure form in advance. I can remove that condition out and the buyer can sign off stating that they have already received the disclosure form. Again, shrinking this all down. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the title. In my opinion, it's only my opinion, unless there's something screwy going on with the disclosure or with the title, those are two things that any good agent should hopefully be able to help identify in advance of writing an offer. If you have a disclosure condition in, or if you have a title condition in, and there's not a problem that you've already seen with those two documents or something that you need to look into further, it's just a sign to me that you just have either a lazy listing agent or a lazy buyer's agent, and they haven't taken the time to review these very, very simple documents. And now I'm going to also leave in insurance. So these are what we call the famous 5 conditions. I think they should be currently the famous 3 conditions: financing, inspection, disclosure, and title, probably coming out on most properties, hopefully, if you're doing your due diligence in advance, and insurance. You do want to make sure that the property can be insured. And for strata properties, you're going to want to make sure that the strata insurance fits your budget as well. So what you'll notice is now if I scroll up and down, that little scroll bar is completely gone, meaning that this is going to print just like this in this big of print, and we won't have to get out our magnifying glasses to read it. Now, of course, I'm going to fill in all of these blanks because you're going to pick and negotiate the subject removal date. You're going to show the seller, in this case, how strong of financing you have, what types of mortgage terms you're looking for, when you're going to do the inspection by. That's what I've left all of these blanks here for. I would never send an offer over to the other agent on the other side with any of these blanks in place. Keeping moving on down. Now I'm going to get into the strata conditions. Now, again, this is if you're in a multiple offer situation, you could very well read all of this strata documentation in advance. But in this case, let's say we're going to leave it in. I'm going to type in how much of the strata documents I want to look at, or what length of time I want to look at them for. Usually in BC, it's 2 years. Now, if this was a detached property, this section of the strata would be completely removed. Then I'm going to address the documents and the fact that, hey, I want my buyers and everybody involved in the transaction to know I'm just supplying these documents. I'm not responsible for the information in them. So that's just some disclaimers there. And then every single offer that's ever been written ever should have this disclaimer. And the buyer and seller should understand that they do have the right to seek legal advice. So they should go ahead and do so. Now, in BC, illegal substances is probably the second clause that should be in everything. We had a real grow-up problem in this province between about 2004 and 2008. There was weed being grown everywhere. So every single BC real estate transaction should have an illegal substances clause saying that this property was never a grow-up. And then you can get into more specific details, again, a special levy clause. But what I want to do here is just scroll down a little bit further. There's a bylaw notice in, again, if this is a strata property. Now, there should be a buyer and seller acknowledgement of some sort. Your agent will probably have their own written in their own way. And if you have any concerns, the acknowledgement should be here. But I just like to try and leave things on the table in advance so there's no problems that come up. So for instance, you know what? If you are hiding damaged flooring underneath of that rug in the living room, I want you to sign off here saying that you're not hiding anything. On the buyer's side, there's going to also be a bunch of acknowledgments, like you're aware that there is transfer taxes. So there can be nobody coming back to me when you're working with me as a buyer saying, hey, you didn't tell me about this or this or this. So there needs to be some sort of extra buyer acknowledgments. And again, whatever's written here is dependent on whatever the agent would like to put in. Often I see none, and I think there should be a bunch so the buyers are very well informed about exactly what they are doing. Now, I'm going to get into a page where I'm probably going to start deleting most of these things. For instance, I have some stuff here about a tenanted property. Now, if a property was tenanted and I forgot to write this stuff in, I could be in real trouble. But in this case, let's pretend the property is not tenanted, so I can just take out all my pre-written tenancy clauses. Same with a rent back. A rent back is something where the seller stays longer term. Again, we're going to take that out. Something about extending or shortening dates. I probably don't need any of this in a standard contract, but in the event that I do want to extend or shorten dates, the clause is pre-written here, and there's no way that I can screw it up or get it wrong because I've done it so many times and it's already in my template. So let's pull that out of here. I think I've even got more of these pages down below. For instance, the things like my backup offer clauses, no material, like all of this stuff for most offers is just going to come right out. But if there's any property where I think GST is payable, I don't want to go track down these clauses each and every time and forget to put in certain lines. So in this particular case, I'm going to actually remove all of these off of the last page. But again, better safe than sorry. So let me take these out of here. And you're going to see that it's going to ask me, hey, now that this page is blank, do you want to delete it from the contract? Obviously, I say yes. And you'll remember that I did the same thing in the last page. So I'm going to delete that page as well. And now I am left with only a 9-page contract instead of 11. And So each one of these conditions or terms or whatever that's written into this offer, I don't have to sign off on them if they're pre-printed the first time, but if they change, we have to cross them out and initial them. But the buyer and seller both then have to accept the offer, have to initial at the bottom of each page. After terms and conditions, we get into the dates. Now, completion and possession and adjustment are the three very important dates. I guess subject removal is an important date as well. But completion means the day that the money changes hands for the property. Possession is the day that the keys change hands for the property. They are very different things. They can be the same day sometimes. Most often here in BC, they are 2 or 3 or 4 days apart. So we're going to want to clarify here exactly what the right completion, possession, and adjustment dates are. The adjustments is the statement of adjustments prepared by the lawyers to work on things like property taxes, make sure everybody's paying the right amounts. And then also at possession, you're going to actually specify the exact time you get the keys. Because here in BC, you get keys from your real estate agent. I know in places like Ontario, you actually get the keys from the lawyers. Now, this is my favorite part, and I'm going to tell you a little story along with it. Now, what I have noticed is on the latest version of this web forms program that is now no longer in the hands of the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board, this does not populate in each new form. So what that means is you have to retype this each and every time. So I keep this on a separate document so I don't forget anything. But this is where most agents forget. This year alone in 2023, I've had at least 5, if not 6 offers where the agents forgot to write in things like appliances or other included items. Let me tell you, wow, do they ever freak out after they go all the way through subject removal and get the property sold when I phone them and ask them, hey, is there any reason your client didn't want the appliances? And then their jaw drops. You can almost hear it on the other end of the phone because they did not fill out this section or they auto-filled it out from the listing. Now, this is where you should put the chattels. A chattel is something that is under its own weight. So your fridge is a chattel. Your oven is a chattel. Your dishwasher is screwed in. So it's technically a fixture. This needs to be clarified. And this is generally what I will write in. And then when I'm writing an offer, what I will do is I will go in, refer back to the pictures as I'm writing the offer to make sure that this all makes sense. Fridge, stove, hood fan, microwave, depending on which one it is, dishwasher, clothes washer, dryer, built-in vacuum. So this, you can see why maybe not all properties do have a built-in vacuum. Let's say this one does not. I can easily just delete this out. It's easier than remembering to put it in. I hope real estate agents watch this because I would like to see you starting to do that. Let's say, for instance, it's a townhouse complex and there is no visitor passes. Well, we can take those out. You know what? The curtains were ugly. We're going to take those out too. And then there is an excluding item. So if the seller wants to remove anything with, for instance, tools that is affixed, say, for instance, they want to take the TV mount off of the wall, you would have to write that in here and we would verify exactly what is to be removed out of the property. So included items, you may even want to put in sheds, gazebos, all of those things should just probably be included there. And then this is a very, very, very important little tiny clause here, number 8. The buyer does expect that they will receive the property in about the same condition as the day they viewed it, and then you write in the day that the buyer saw the property. Now, that's probably the most exciting part, if you can call it that, of the contract. Again, we're going to sign at the bottom of each page. Then you get into some standard clauses that are provided by the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. I'm not going to bore you with them here. There's nothing you're probably doing to change any of them, so don't stress out about them. However, here in my market of Surrey, this was Christy Clark's clause that she brought in. You will often see 20A scratched. That is the inability to assign a contract, which is just legal. You can assign any contract. Christy Clark tried to remove that practice and she called it shadow flipping. And my experience is this will be crossed out. There's another form that needs to come with it if it is crossed out. So look for this one. Look for 20A. If you are receiving offers, personally, I don't think it's a big deal. I see it crossed out all the time. My sellers accept crossed out 20As all of the time. But the rest of these clauses on these pages are probably nothing that you should be super concerned about because they are a standard form. Until, of course, you get down to Section 21, which discusses agency. Now, The first line here, A, is for the seller to initial off and saying who their agent is. And if it's a team and a brokerage, it all needs to be listed here. The buyer signs off on B and says who their representation is. So there is no miscommunication about who has who as their agent, because in C, the disclosure of risks associated with dual agency needs to be signed off if there is only one real estate agent involved working for the buyer and seller. And my understanding is the BCFSA not only has to give permission for that to happen, that they have granted actually no permissions for that to happen. So there should never be someone signing off on dual agency. However, if you are an unrepresented party for the buyer or the seller, either party, and now there's only one real estate agent involved, but one of the parties is choosing not to use a realtor, well, they would sign off on either D or E. Keeping on. Acceptance is irrevocable. I find this one very funny. We used to have a term that said acceptance is irrevocable, and it basically means that, hey, Mr. Seller, once you accept this offer, you may not walk away, and B, buyer, you may not walk away either unless you have subjects or conditions into your offer. So we're still signing off on that, except when you go right down to number 23, which says, oh yeah, by the way, the buyer actually can rescind their offer, so acceptance is revocable. Now, this is where it covers off on the 0.25% of the purchase price in the event that they do that. Now, the buyer and seller are going to initial again here that they have both acknowledged that there is a buyer rescission period. However, if you haven't seen it enough on my channel, the buyer rescission period is kind of a joke because it applies to every contract. But if you have conditions, it kind of doesn't apply to your contract. I don't want to get into that here, but this is one of the most confusing spots on the contract for people to exactly kind of ingest and understand exactly what's happening. But let's keep going down. Now, it's super, super, super important. Number 25, this is the one real estate agents get wrong all the time, and it drives me crazy, and it's going to end up people in lawsuits. You may not go past the time written in 25, time and date, and revive an offer. So if I put in here that this offer is open until tonight at 8 p.m. and you counter me back as the listing agent at 9:30, that deal is dead. We need to start over from scratch. It cannot happen. You may not accept a dead offer. So if you're doing that as a real estate agent, or if your real estate agent says it's okay to do that, trust me, it is 100% not. You have to sign off on a contract within the period of time of which it is still a valid offer. Then the buyer signs off saying whether or not they are or are not a permanent resident or Canadian citizen. Very important these days, obviously. And this is the first place and probably only place where they actually sign their entire name, print it, and witness it. Now, here's another thing that happens with witnessing. There is no way to witness a contract if you're using something like AuthentiSign or DocuSign online. So witnessing is not actually mandatory and should only be done if you're actually watching, as a real estate agent, your client sign that paperwork. And then we go into the seller's acceptance. Now, this is a absolutely foolish thing. You're going to understand what I mean here very quickly, but it says the acceptance from the seller, and it's dated. So we may have started this negotiation yesterday, but we're going to accept it on, I don't know, sometime tomorrow. So you would put the day you accept it or the day you counter offer. So that day goes in here. Then the seller does the same thing, says that they either are or are not a resident of Canada. These boxes are for tax purposes, so you want to make sure you get them right, and then the seller signs down below. However, with the buyer rescission notice, we now have a new box at the bottom, which not only outlines where the buyer may actually send the rescission notice. This hopefully is going to the listing agent. But I guess I should clarify that a little bit, because the rescission period, again, I've got videos on this on the channel all over. The rescission period has nothing to do with the agencies themselves. It's strictly between the buyer and the seller. So the buyer may, if they choose, deliver this notice directly to the seller, like show up at their doorstep and hand it to them. It's ridiculous. You think the agent should be involved, but they could actually not be involved. Ideally, if you're a good agent and you're working for your client, you should be the one receiving the buyer's rescission notice. So your email address, all that stuff should go in here. I don't know who's faxing anymore. Apparently the government that makes this form. But this is the best part and the last part. So I've saved the best for last. It's kind of ridiculous. Now we also not only have an acceptance date, but we also now have a final acceptance date. So what we have to do is clarify when the offer was finally accepted. Maybe negotiations took 4 days, and this offer up here would say, well, the first day of the counter offer. Well, this date down below is actually going to say the day you finally signed off. Because even if you have 4 days of negotiations, the buyer apparently still needs 3 more business days after that to walk away should they choose. So you want to write down the last day of which everybody signed everything, write it in here, and then you're going to outline the buyer rescission date, which is 3 business days after the day you accept. So let's say it's a Thursday, it's Friday is the first day of your buyer rescission period, but Monday is a holiday. Well, we are going all the way through until next Wednesday for that buyer to decide to walk away or not. And none of that matters if they have conditions that go longer than that anyway. And the best part of this bottom section here is my training with the regulator said that, hey, the buyer actually doesn't have to sign off on any portion of this down at the bottom. So I find that to be a bit ridiculous because who's stopping somebody from writing in the wrong date on a fully accepted offer? I'm sure that's not hopefully going to be a problem, however, and it's likely never going to be a real issue unless, as we say in the business, it's not a problem until it's a problem. So there you go. You have successfully completed this form. Your offer has been accepted and you bought a house. It's just that easy. Well, maybe not, because there's a whole lot more you will want to know. And you can continue your research into buying right now by watching my complete guide to buying real estate linked here. So check that out before you go. Please subscribe, click the like button, and we'll see you in a couple of days.